Good afternoon, and welcome to our online town hall conversation with Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger. My name is James Dozier, and I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our conversation. Over the past 10 days, we've asked folks on Facebook and Twitter to submit their questions about our nation's energy future. And today, Congressman Kinzinger will answer your questions. But first, let me introduce the Congressman, who has an impressive resume. He's in his second term in the House of Representatives, served in the United States Air Force where he flew missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, and continues that service today in the U.S. Air National Guard, where he holds the rank of Major. As a member of the House, he sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee and was named one of Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars in American Politics. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for letting us be in your office. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
today.
the office doesn't quite look like my office with all this, but it's nice to have you here.
Making us all look good. Congressman, since being elected to the House, you've talked a lot about the 16th Congressional District, the model it can serve for energy diversity. What lessons have you learned from back home, and what implications do they have for the country?
Well, that's a good question, and I've got to tell you, I admire the level of involvement I've seen people in doing this, and the questions I've seen come out on this. And with the 16th district, so my district represents basically the border of Wisconsin and then down and over to Indiana. And so you look at all the different, I have 4 nuclear power plants and 8 nuclear reactors in that. We have hydropower, so a city that has draws some of its energy off of the rivers that we have. We have ethanol. Ethanol is a big deal in Illinois with the corn production and agricultural production. We have a lot of wind towers and producing energy that way. And I have an oil refinery in my district. So if you look at, the great amount of energy that the United States brings to the table, it's really all in my district. So it's neat. And the lessons I've learned from people is just, look, it provides good paying jobs, and in many of these, it's good, clean energy for the future.
So when we talk about American energy diversity, we know it has an economic impact, it has an environmental impact, but it also has a national security impact. Right. And that's actually where our first question comes from, and it's from Facebook. Dennis from Mount Vernon, Illinois, asks, why aren't we hearing anything about the U.S. Navy's discovery of successfully making fuel from seawater?
Yeah.
Fascinating topic, and certainly something we've heard a lot about how we can power our military into the future. What are you seeing in terms of the future for powering that military, and what benefits will it bring to the country?
Well, that's a good question, Dennis, and you're right. You don't hear a lot about this, and the government and the military is usually on the leading edge of trying to find out new ways to power, new ways to innovate, not just because of the environmental impact and not just because we want the coolest technology, but if you think about it, getting fuel out of seawater for the Navy means that they don't have to port and refuel all the time. It's good for defense interests. So I think, look, that technology is still a little bit out until it can be brought to market. We don't know how economically viable it is yet. But I think things like that, we just had a jet that flies on, biofuels now. We talk about turning our Navy green and things like that. This is all, I think, very beneficial to the strategic interest of the United States. And plus, looking beyond that, you see what's happening in Ukraine right now. You see what's happening in frankly, all over the world. And as somebody that's been in Iraq and Afghanistan, to be able to have energy as a soft weapon is very important.
So then our next question comes from Twitter, from Rasta1619, also from Illinois, and asking, what changes in energy policy would you support that makes the U.S. more modern, as we talked about with the military, innovative, renewable, cleaner, and safer?
Yeah, I think the big key is we have to have a tax policy that encourages people to come up with new ideas, research and development on energy. I think it's very important. You have to, look, there's got to be an economic incentive for people to innovate. Right. And that's what I think is great about our country is if somebody has an idea, an amazing idea, and they find a way that they can make money with it, they'll do it. So I think getting regulators to allow this innovation to breathe. Look at the internet. The internet is one of the least regulated spaces, and it's where we see some of the most innovation. And so I think, we're not anti-regulation because we want people dumping stuff in rivers. I think that finding the right amount of regulation to allow people to innovate is going to be very important. And then also understanding that, oil is kind of important today, but hopefully in 30 and 40 years, we don't need it anymore because we've gotten to a point where we found a positive replacement.
Right. And so on that, regulation theme, as you mentioned, the next question comes from Chicago and from Twitter user Aquatic. How can energy innovation be better incentivized as a form of conscious capitalism?
You know, it's a tough one because you have to monetize energy development. And we all know that typically energy is drawn in by whether it's municipalities on the electric side or cars on the, the gas side. So how do you innovate it? How do you monetize it? That's going to be one of the difficult questions. And so, I mean, we see that even with things like using natural gas in vehicles. It's the chicken or the egg scenario. We know natural gas is cleaner than just regular gasoline, even though it's not the cleanest fuel yet. You have hydrogen and everything else. So I think the key is to create a situation out in Washington where we have a light touch, but we also can allow people to go out and innovate and find a way to make the money at the process. That's the difficult thing. And so, it's not that government can necessarily do all of it, but we can get out of the way and allow people to do some of it.
Well, of course, we ask questions about energy innovation, and the environment ties into that. And we did get several questions from folks in the district about climate change, its impact on national security, the economy, the environment. And we have seen a lot of intense and sometimes partisan debate on this issue. You've spoken about clean energy and how we look at greenhouse gas emissions and how we look forward on this. So what do you see as your role as a leader, the role of the party on this issue, moving us kind of past that debate and more towards those solutions?
Yeah, it's a good issue to discuss, and I appreciate the questions on it. So you have really two sides. You have one side, if you want to just go on the extremes, that says there's no such thing as any kind of global warming, that really doesn't matter how much pollution we dump and things like that. And then you have the other side that says let's get rid of anything that could in any way pollute the environment, even if it means we all have to ride bicycles the rest of our life. So somewhere in the middle is the answer there. And I think I do fault the president a little bit, I think, in being too aggressive on the issue. Instead of coming to Republicans and saying we may not always agree, and look, we vary even among Republicans, but we may not always agree on how to get to the end state, but we want to get to the end state. Look at the 16th district, right? I'm a big believer in nuclear power. Nuclear power is like the cleanest power that we can have. It's very green, very efficient. I have a lot of wind. Wind is good. So, a Republican may be drawn into, or a very conservative person may be drawn into the idea of alternatives because there's a monetization to it, because people have jobs based on it, and yet it works for both sides. So I think it's going to take both sides coming together and saying we may not agree on the end, all the details and how we get there, but we agree that, different kinds of energy and clean energy, it's good for our waters, it's good for our air, and I think we can find agreement there.
So recently you penned an op-ed about nuclear energy and the jobs that it creates in Illinois. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see the future in nuclear in terms of job creation for the state?
So Illinois actually gets half of its power from nuclear, and the country as a whole gets 20% of its power from nuclear. So it's a very important base load generation. And it pays really well. So I actually live just a few miles away from a nuclear power station in Illinois. And the people that work there love it. Some of them make 6 figures. They all get paid pretty doggone well. A lot of them come out of the military and go into that. And so I think it plays a very important role in terms of that job creation. The problem is the United States has lost its technological advantage in this area. We see ourselves being trumped in some cases by the French, in some cases by the Russians. And we've seen that nuclear is getting priced out of the overall energy market. And so I'm actually very concerned about the future of nuclear power, and I think it's something that in Washington we have to take very seriously to ensure that nuclear power is incentivized, that it's priced within the market, and it's not unduly burdened. We want people to be safe, and when we see events like what happened in Fukushima, let's learn what we can from there and make sure we're safe in our own way. But if we lose our base nuclear power, it's going to be replaced by other methods of energy that probably are not as good for the environment.
So, several folks did write to ask about renewable, and we talk about producing more energy. Adam from Seattle emailed to ask, what sources of renewable energy do you support, and how can we make sure the government is encouraging these forms of energy?
That's a good question. I support all of them. I mean, I think anything that can generate energy is great for our country. And I think, it's the eggs in the basket. So I'm a veteran of the military, as we talked about. And at one point in Afghanistan, they found a crack in a wing of an F-18, and they had to ground the whole F-18 fleet while they inspected them. Didn't matter, though, because we had A-10s and F-16s and all these other planes. And so energy is the same way. You have to have diversity in the energy basket. And so, I think the ability to be able to to do things like having wind and everything is going to be very important. And so, well, hit me with that last part again, because I kind of lost my train of thought.
Yeah, no worries. It's asking what do you support in terms of energy and the government. What's the government doing?
So all of it. Well, I have a huge solar plant in my district. It actually was neat to go out and see all these solar panels producing energy. We have a lot of wind. And so I think when energy is new, it's important for a production tax credit. It's important for helping these companies to get off the ground. And then at some point they become mature. And that's when the government can back away and allow these different technologies to stand on their own.
Well, in that kind of same vein of Congress, what's before it, Andrew in LA asked, is there any legislation currently in Congress to promote alternative energy sources?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of pieces of legislation in Congress right now. Probably nothing is going to move anytime soon. I mean, right now, what we're focused on is, the spending side of things and how we're going to budget. As you all know, that's a big controversial issue out here. But I think one of the things that there is potential for movement is in terms of energy efficiency. So when we talk about the production of energy, that's very important, but let's use less and be more efficient about it. That's just as good as being able to produce more. And so there are some very good bills. There's a very good bill actually out here in Washington to try to promote energy efficiency. And this is something that I've tried to work on in a big way to ensure that not only are we going to be able to produce different kinds of energy and do it better and make ourselves more competitive in the world, but that we also use it efficiently. One of the greatest, people probably don't necessarily know this, but one of the biggest users of energy is the federal government.
That's wonderful. And true, and it's amazing to see these different pieces of legislation that folks are considering move through on both that supply and demand, because the conversation focuses a lot on that supply side, and we do kind of lose some of that conversation about how we use it more efficiently. Can you, I guess, just talk maybe a little bit more about what might be moving, maybe what you're supporting, what folks are considering in terms of natural gas or that energy efficiency side of the equation?
So, well, from a natural gas perspective, there's a lot of discussion about, how do we provide the world with our natural gas as well. We're finding out today that we have a ton of natural gas in the United States of America. We're probably, I think by 2020, going to be the world's leading energy producer. So if we can export our natural gas to other parts of the world that maybe have dirtier burning technology, that's positive impact on the environment. That's positive on our economy. That's good for jobs. That brings nuclear in line to be, competitive all around everything else. From an energy efficiency perspective, how about new source performance standards? So on federal buildings, for instance, as I said, we're the greatest utilizer of power. So have companies come in and figure out how a building can use less energy. And you know what? The private sector in doing that can make some money off energy savings. The federal government makes money off spending less. And ultimately, we're using less energy around the globe, and so, or actually around our country, which is a very beneficial thing. Even looking at things like insulation, different ways to do insulation. So there's a lot of good ideas that are going to come out on both sides, both in terms of the utilization of natural gas, our energy, but also in terms of using less. Because not only do we have to provide the energy for the population today, but populations are growing exponentially fast all around the world.
So on this last part here, so looking ahead to the future, younger voters, kind of what world they're going to inherit from the current generation, what would you like to say to them? And when you do leave Congress in the future, what would you like to look back and see being changed, or how do you envision kind of the future of energy for the next generation?
What I'd like to see being changed is Americans that can have conversations with each other again. I mean, it seems like the last few years it's just been so divided that we can't even talk. And so I'd like to see Americans be able to do that. From a youth perspective, I mean, the young people today need to understand that the decisions we're making out here are going to be the world that you live in. So the decisions I make, the votes I make today, some of them have an effect tomorrow, but a lot of them have an effect in 10 or 20 years. And so that's why seeing young people engaged out here is so important. So when you look into the future, do you want to be paying $9 a gallon to fill your car to travel? Or do you want to have a car that in some cases you can plug in, maybe you have gasoline when you run out of energy, or maybe you have a completely new, different kind of energy? Do you want to be able to turn the lights on in your home and not worry about having to decide between turning on the lights or going and buying food? And these are the decisions we make today that have an impact on the long term. So just like saving for retirement, right? You can't save for retirement a year before you retire. You have to do it when you're young. And that's the decisions we make in energy. If we want to be wealthy in terms of energy, and we want to have green energy, and we want to be able to have a clean environment and a strong economy, these are decisions we have to make today. And so it's a conversation that I think needs to happen more. I appreciate your group for bringing that conversation to the front line. And I appreciate people for being engaged and talking to their legislators about these important issues.
Well, and thank you for that. And, conversation is so important. And, allow me to just end on this last point. Is there anything that, we didn't ask you that you wish we had included in the questions or that had been submitted from folks online? Or any parting thoughts?
I'd been tracking up to this, and I saw a lot of people's questions online, and they're very good stuff. And it's neat to see people deeply engaged in the future of their country. And so, look, we've got a lot of work to do out here. We have a lot of discussions that are going to take, Republicans and Democrats saying we may not agree on everything, but let's find some common ground where we can work together. And I think energy is one of those areas where we can easily find some common ground. There'll probably be some issues we'll still be arguing about in 10 years that we're arguing about today, but energy doesn't have to be one of them.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We appreciate your time and your insights, and
bet.
Look forward to more in the future. And I'd also like to thank all of you for tuning in today, and for those of you who submitted questions. Obviously, we didn't have enough time to get through to everyone's questions, but please continue the conversation online using hashtag KinzingerEnergy so we can continue to see your questions and provide answers. You can also learn more about Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions by liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter, and going to our website, action.citizens4.com. With that, on behalf of myself, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, and Congressman Kinzinger, I'd like to thank you all for participating in today's online town hall conversation.
Thank you.